I will give the speech to Mr. Reiner Fuellmich. Could it be? Yes? So please, the stage is yours.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I also want to thank Marta and her team for putting together this perfectly well-organized conference. This is great. It's my first time in Portugal. My wife has been here before, and she told me, if this is good for you, let's take a look and let's see if we can stay there, find a place to stay after this is all over. And I do think it will be over soon, and I'll explain to you why I think so. You know, when I first got here at the airport and I listened to the sound of this language, it's great. It's so smooth. It reminds me. It sounded as though I was constantly listening to the song "Girl from Ipanema." I know it's not Portuguese, it's Brazilian, but still, it's just great. So and another thing why Portugal is so important, because most people probably don't remember, but this country was the first one whose judiciary took a close look at the PCR test, which is at the core of this. It is the most important thing that they used in order to create this pandemic. Well, I have divided my presentation into 3 parts. I'm going to start out because I don't want to evade, I don't want to dodge the topic, I don't want to look as though I'm afraid of talking about it, but I want to keep it brief and short. First, a brief look at what happened with the Corona Investigative Committee. How did it implode, and what is going to happen next? Then I will tell you, this is the second part, I will tell you or summarize the findings of the investigations that we've done so far. And I really call it, I don't like to call it that, but I call it from eugenics to genocide, because that's what we're dealing with. This is not a time to mince words anymore. It's the right time to call a spade a spade. And finally, the third part will deal with an outlook. I'm going to try and give you a positive outlook. What can we do, and what can we expect to happen over the next couple of months? Not over the next couple of years, but over the next couple of months. Let me start with the Corona Investigative Committee and what went wrong with it. Well, I think we did a pretty good job. We interviewed more than 400 people over the course of 2.5 years. I believe it all started on July 10th of 2020. But what most people didn't realize is that there were serious differences of opinion between my co-host and myself right from the start. I'm glad nobody noticed, but this is really what made it very difficult to work. I want to have a plan. I need a strategy. She wanted chaos, which she thinks breeds creativity. I don't think so. She trusts no one, believes everyone is a potential enemy. I look at people the other way around. Plus, and I will get back to this at the end of my presentation, I need to be able to connect with people on an emotional level, and she can't do that. To make a long story very, very short, for reasons that still remain a mystery, in early September of this year, my co-host decided to take everything apart. She decided to tell a bunch of lies and half-truths, and what made it even worse, she went public with that. All lies, nothing is true. This has done grave damage to our party. We joined a new party, which is it's called Die Basis, which is the 8th largest party in Germany. We're the co-leaders of this party. And this party was in the middle of a state election in the state of Lower Saxony. So that disrupted the entire race. What made it even worse is that it did grave damage to the resistance as a whole. Not just in Germany, but all over the world. A lot of people seem to have put a lot of hope into our work and couldn't believe what she was doing. Up until then, my team and I had kept everything on track. Had we not done this, she probably would have derailed the committee a long time ago. Well, now she's done it, but my team and I have rebuilt the committee under a new format, and we call it the International Crimes Investigative Committee, short ICIC. It's pronounced ICIC. we're almost ready to go online, but we had to start from scratch. We had to build our technical team, rebuild our technical team. Part of a new team had to be integrated. We have a new logo. We're about to go online, probably tonight, maybe tomorrow, but we will start with airing our first interviews. The first one we did was with Dr. Peter Breggin. He's probably the most famous American psychiatrist, and Dr. Naomi Wolf. She's a journalist, a writer, and an activist. It was a discussion on Professor Susharit Bhakti. He's a really good friend of ours. Professor Susharit Bhakti's new findings about personality changes induced by the mRNA vaccines. I'll get back to that a little later. Peter Breggin compared what happened to the people who got the shots to lobotomy. Most people don't even know what it is because they can't remember. But if you've ever seen the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, then you know what we're talking about. Was he really? Ooh, I consider this one of the worst crimes against humanity ever committed. If you've seen what they do with these people, it is insane. It is insane. But they're going to pay for it. The time has come. So what is the purpose or the mission of the new ICIC, International Crimes Investigative Committee? It's twofold. One, we want to continue with the collection and spreading of real information. In effect, we want to continue exposing all these lies that we have been told by what we used to think our politicians and our mainstream media. And these lies go far beyond Corona, because as most of us probably know, the Great Reset also deals with the Ukraine crisis, it deals with food and energy shortages, global warming. All that is bullshit, and it's all driven by the same people. So that's our mission number one, or purpose number one. Number two is we want to show how to get out of this. We want to show the people, and this is happening already on a very grand scale worldwide, how to disconnect from these totally corrupt global organizations, corporations, and NGOs, from the World Health Organization, from NATO, from the World Bank, from the EU. Totally corrupt organizations. So what we believe is that because this system, or their system, they've been infiltrating it for at least 30 years, maybe much longer, but we can prove that it goes back 30 years. We need to disconnect because this system is collapsing. It is collapsing right now, and there's nothing that can save it. We need to disconnect and set up our own custom-made, self-sufficient communities in our regions, totally independent from these global criminal organizations, and we have to learn how to produce our own energy, set up our own system of education, healthcare, economics, and maybe even a new system of judiciary. And we can do it because why? Because we are the people. We are the people, and we have our own. Most Germans don't understand this because they've been conditioned to follow orders and ask for permission to do anything. But they can still learn. So we have our own individual sovereignty, each and every one of us, irrespective of state or national sovereignty. Each one of us, individual, has something to offer. We know what to do. We can join our forces. We can see if we can find allies who share the same ideas that we do. And then we set up our own little community with our own self-sufficient energy, education, whatever else. And then we can connect with each other and exchange the best ideas. That is what democracy is really about, I believe, because democracy is bottom up. It's not top down. It's no one telling us what to do and what we cannot do. Why am I saying that we need to disconnect from these global institutions? Why do I think that we can't trust them anymore? Well, most of us know that this evil man by the name of Klaus Schwab set up the World Economic Forum in 1971. Well, that's true, but it's only part of the truth. The rest of the story is this. Klaus Schwab's father was an advisor to Adolf Hitler. He tried to help Adolf Hitler set up or invent a nuclear and atomic bomb. Luckily, he failed. Maybe he was too stupid. Maybe the Americans were too smart. I don't know. Klaus Schwab tried to do the same thing for South Africa in the 1970s. He failed too, luckily. But at the same time, or shortly before that, in the early 1960s, he went to Harvard in the United States. And that's where he met a war criminal, Henry Kissinger. And Henry Kissinger introduced him to a CIA-funded program. The United States foreign policy had changed at that time. Foreign policy with respect to Europe. It had changed from nuclear deterrence, keep everyone in panic mode and get everyone to agree to new rockets and new armaments, from nuclear deterrence to we want to influence directly European politics. That's why they had him set up the World Economic Forum in 1971, to influence directly European politics. 20 years later, in 1992, he invented the Young Global Leaders Program. They have been producing what we think are our politicians ever since 1992. Most of the politicians who are now running European and world governments are creatures of the Young Global Leaders Program. That's why I think we can't trust them. They work for the other side. They don't care about us. They only care about themselves and about the other side. Example, two of the first to graduate from this program are Angela Merkel and Bill Gates, two evil and stupid people. Others are Tony Blair from Great Britain, José Aznar, and lately Emmanuel Macron, Herr Kurz from Austria, Ursula von der Leyen, one of the most corrupt people in the world. But also Jacinda Ardern, who is the Premier of New Zealand, and of course Justin Trudeau. And I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, because everyone knows this, because, what's his name, Klaus Schwab runs around and tells everyone how successful the World Economic Forum has been at infiltrating those governments. He even boasts that half of the Canadian Parliament has been infiltrated by the World Economic Forum. We will get these criminals. Just wait a little while longer. Thank you. Now let me summarize what most of you probably know. The findings of our investigation from eugenics to genocide is what I call it. When this all started, I think I've told this before, but at any rate, some people may not know it. When this all started, my wife and I was in semi-retirement. I had moved to the United States. We have a ranch up in Northern California, and I was looking forward to go a little bit of horseback riding, maybe scuba diving, maybe windsurfing. And I was actually even thinking about going back into gymnastics. I was a gymnast when I was younger. But my wife told me, first of all, you've got to lose a few pounds, and then we can talk about it again. So I promised her I'm not going to start with a backward somersault. But then we got these calls from our friends and relatives talking about strange things happening in Europe, the lockdown. Lockdown, I had never heard of this term before, except for one time, because there was a movie with Sylvester Stallone. It's called Lockdown. It's a prison term. It's used when they have prison riots, then they lock down the prisoners. And that's what they tried to do with us. So I couldn't make any sense of this, but ultimately my wife persuaded me to go back to Germany because she said, you have to do something about it. You have the right people. We used to be 17 lawyers in my team in Germany, and we used to fight all these big corporations, none of which are not criminals. I used to work for one of them. I used to work in Tokyo for Deutsche Bank, which is one of the most criminal organizations in the world. So she thought, I can do it. Well, It was very quickly that I realized this is not just one or two of these big corporations, it's pretty much all of them. And now we're down to 3 lawyers in my firm because none of the others wanted anything to do with Corona. But it's okay. It only takes a few good men and women, and I'm now connected with all these international lawyers, and that's a lot of fun, despite the fact that it's not really funny to see what we have to fight. So, despite all these difficulties that I initially described, I think we managed to do, the Corona Investigative Committee managed to do some really good interviews. We spoke with many experts from all walks of science, experts in medicine, economics, psychology, politics, including geopolitics and history, and even the judiciary, among them Dr. Mike Yeadon. He's a former vice president of Pfizer. He's one of the most knowledgeable and authentic and straightforward people I know. He's a good friend of mine now. I just visited him in Florida. And then there's Catherine Austin Fitz. She's a former assistant secretary of housing and urban development of the United States and also an investment banker. She's an expert on how the other side, she calls them Mr. Global, is trying to not only reduce the population by killing them through so-called vaccines, but also to gain full control over those who survive by introducing a one-world government under the UN, which is under their control, and introducing a one-world digital currency under their control, of course. Brian Pickford, a former premier of Newfoundland and Labrador in Canada, we interviewed him, great guy. Patrick Wood, he's one of the best experts on globalization. He's, of course, an anti-globalist from the United States. Dr. Judy Mikovits, she's going to be our most important witness because she has had personal interactions with the crooks by the name of Fauci and Gallo and others. She's been around for a while. She's in great shape, but she knows these people. She met them personally in the early 1980s. Most of you probably know Professor Susharit Bhakti. He's one of the most honest people I've ever met. He's a good friend. But we've also spoken with Archbishop Vigano, who is also a very straightforward person. He knows everything. He knows every little detail about this, and he's fighting very hard to get the church to fight back. Okay, well, the 3 basic questions that we wanted answers to is, 1, how dangerous is the virus? Well, it turns out it's no more dangerous than the common flu. They may have tried to fiddle around with it, these gain-of-function experiments, but it's still no more dangerous than the common flu. The infection fatality rate is between 0.14 and 0.15%. There was no excess mortality anywhere until the start of the vaccination campaigns. Now, many of you are going to say, oh yeah, what about Bergamo? What about New York? Well, we know in the meantime this is all due to the pressure, due to malpractice, medical malpractice, to the use of drugs that kill people, ivermectin being one of them. And none of this has anything to do with the virus. There was no excess mortality because of the virus. But ever since the start of the vaccination campaign, there are lots of people who have died. There are lots of people who have suffered serious adverse reactions. And, of course, apart from the vaccination campaign, the lockdowns have destroyed a lot of businesses on purpose because they're trying to destroy all of these small and medium-sized businesses so that the large platforms, Silicon Valley-style platforms, can take over. The most important example is, of course, Amazon, which is taking over the small and medium-sized businesses, the retail business in essence. So how dangerous is the virus? Simple answer, no more dangerous than the common flu. How reliable, that's the most important question. How reliable is the PCR test? When I first learned this, in one of the hearings that the Corona Investigative Committee did, I just couldn't believe it. It was Professor Kemmerer who told us about the PCR test, and I asked my friend Mike Yeadon, and I asked Dolores Cahill, and I asked more and more people, and they all agree that a PCR test can under no circumstances tell us anything about infections. But this is what they used in order to create cases. Since Well, I don't know if most of you are doctors, but give me a couple of minutes just to explain the basics, which I understand, and therefore I think most non-doctors will understand it as well. PCR test, even if you apply it correctly, will never be able to tell you anything about infections for two basic reasons. There are many more. I don't understand them, but those two I understand. One is it cannot distinguish between dead and live matter. So if you test positive, it is very likely that you test positive because the test finds the fragments of your body's immune system's fight against the common flu or the common cold. It may be 4 months ago, and it still finds fragments, but they're dead. They don't do anything. That's why it cannot tell you anything about infections. The second reason is for a real infection, you need a whole virus to enter your cells and then start to replicate, and that's when you have symptoms. There's no such thing as asymptomatic infections. Asymptomatic means you're healthy, because you can't go and see a doctor and ask him, I have a problem, because the first thing is he's going to ask you is, what symptoms do you have? And the only thing you can answer is, I watch too much Fauci or Drosten. What cure do you get for that, you know? So the test doesn't find a whole virus because whatever is taken from the swab and put into the machine is destroyed. It's squashed. It's mushed. It only finds fragments. For those two reasons alone, it is impossible for a PCR test to tell us anything about infections. But here comes the kicker. When they first needed cases because they wanted to push their long-planned agenda, I'm going to spare you the details about these long plans. I'm just going to give you some of the brief answers. But when they first wanted to push their agenda and start the pandemic, they didn't have any cases. This is in January of 2020. They needed to go forward with their plan. I think personally that this is an early start because they needed to hide from us, to distract our attention from there to there. What is there? It is their crimes of having looted and plundered our public coffers, of having stolen our assets for decades. The first time I should have noticed as a banker was during the Lehman crisis. It started out as a housing crisis, then turned into a world economic crisis, a euro crisis. That's when most people who understand about finances and banking should have known that these people had stolen everything from us. And the reason why our governments weren't doing anything is because they're not our governments anymore. That's as simple as that. But it was about to erupt again in September of 2019. Because they hadn't done anything about that crisis. Instead of putting these people into jail, no one went to jail, they started to print money. By printing money, it's just like playing Monopoly. By printing money, you don't solve a problem. So in September of 2019, the crisis was there again, and it would have gotten much, much worse. This is called a repo crisis. This means that banks won't lend each other money overnight anymore because they don't trust each other. The only way they could keep this from exploding is by having the Fed, which is a private entity. Most people think it's a governmental entity. No, it's private. It's owned by private people. By having the Fed print money, and at the same time, they needed to divert our attention. They needed to get something, and we know this from a paper that was written by BlackRock. They needed to take drastic measures so that we wouldn't look that way, where they were stealing our assets, but we would look the other way, where there's a pandemic. That's why they, I think, went into an early start. So they needed cases, they didn't have any, and then they turned to a guy by the name of Professor Dr. Drosten from Charité University in Berlin. And they asked him to produce the cases. This guy is a complete fake. He's a fraud, he's a liar, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I can assure you that we have looked into this. He is a fraud, just like most of the puppets whose strings are being pulled by the World Economic Forum. So what did he do? Well, they didn't have any cases, and they wanted to declare a public health emergency of international concern. Public health emergency of international concern, PHEIC, pronounced fake. And it's not pronounced fake by accident. They're laughing at us. I assure you, they're laughing at us. So they wanted to declare this public health emergency of international concern, or the pandemic. Didn't have any cases. That's why they couldn't agree on that declaration. But they agreed on meeting 2 weeks later again, because it's so dangerous. People are still dying in Wuhan. Look, they fell over. They died instantly. Well, I don't know what they died from, but they didn't die of COVID. 2 weeks later, they met again, and that's when they finally were able to declare this public health emergency of international concern. Why is that? Because Drosten had supplied them with his version of the PCR test. He's not the inventor. He's much too stupid for that. But the real inventor is Kary Mullis from the United States, who unfortunately died shortly before the outbreak of the pandemic. He's a very smart, very witty, good man. He got a Nobel Prize, thank you, for the invention of the PCR test. But he always said, this is good for scientific purposes, but you cannot use it for diagnostic purposes. And that's precisely what Drosten did. He used it for diagnostic purposes. He misused it by driving up the so-called cycles of amplification. We all know now at 24 cycles of amplification, it becomes totally unscientific. At 35 cycles of amplification, you get 90% false positives. His test, which was the model for all the other tests, was set at 45 cycles of amplification. So that's how the cases were created. We now know that the measures, they're all based on these cases. There's no other basis, just cases. We know that these measures don't do anything. They're extremely harmful. The lockdowns don't do anything. The social distancing, mask mandates, vaccines are not vaccines. They're neither necessary because there is no pandemic, and there are real methods of treatment. Vitamin B, C, ivermectin, we don't know. I'm not a doctor, but there are real methods of treatment. They're not effective, and they're not safe, as we've heard over and over and over again today. They're horrendously deadly and destructive. We wanted, as the Corona Investigative Committee, I saw there's 400 interviews. This is so many pieces of the puzzle, nobody can make any sense of this. That's why I decided, together with my friend Anna Garner, who's an attorney from New Mexico, we're going to tell this entire story by way of a legal procedure, and we decided on the model grand jury investigation. We had 6 or 7 sessions, I believe, and we told the entire story, starting with eugenics, which is the backdrop to all of this. Then we looked into what happened after World War II. This is when UNESCO was founded, and a guy by the name of Julian Huxley, in his opening speech, a former president of the British Eugenics Society, in his opening speech said, oh, we can't talk about eugenics because Hitler has given it a bad name, but pretty soon we will be able to talk about it again. And that's what's been happening ever since. They went through several exercises. The first one is called, in 2001, I believe, is called Operation Dark Winter, and it looks almost like a blueprint for what we're seeing now. The second one was Operation Lockstep, and the third one is, you remember it, Event 201, which was probably the dry run for what we're seeing. Now, very briefly, let me give you an outlook. First, let's take a look at the judiciary. Well, we do have 4 decisions that state explicitly that PCR tests cannot be the basis for anything. 4 legal decisions. The first one came from Portugal. The second one came from Austria. The third one came from Germany, Weimar, where they afterwards searched the judge who made the ruling, seized his cell phone and his computer. They did the same thing with 3 professors who he had called upon as experts. This was to send a message to the judiciary. If you're not in line with the government, this is what we're going to do to you. The fourth one came from Turkey. The important thing to know is that none of the governments cared about these judicial decisions. None of the governments did. And that's totally different with the American judiciary. There, on April 18th, a federal judge, a woman, wrote one of the best decisions I've ever read, and it decided that the government does not have the power to issue mask mandates on planes, trains, in train stations, and airports. And immediately, the government decided, okay, we better adhere to this. On the same day, masks people didn't have to wear masks anymore. You probably remember the little video clips of people celebrating on the planes, even the pilots high-fiving and celebrating with the passengers. That was the clearest sign ever that the majority of the people is not going to play along with this much longer. And what the big difference is probably that the United States has the Second Amendment. I used to be very critical of that Second Amendment, which includes the right to bear arms. But now I realize why they have it, because they wanted to be ready if they have to fight their own government. I'm almost through. Just a couple more sentences. I do not think, I'm involved in a number of pretty big cases that are right now unfolding in the United States. In one of them, there's 200,000 soldiers who do not want to get vaccinated. Another case involves, it's going to be a class action, involves the victims of remdesivir. And then there's going to be a third case, which I hope will become an international class action, which means that everyone who suffered damages because of the vaccines or the lockdowns can join. But I can only hope for the best. I can promise you I'm going to do the best I can. And that alone is probably sending a message to the other side. But ultimately, I do not think that the judiciary will be able to turn the tide. I think it's up to us. We, the people, must do this. It is up to us humans. We need to connect with each other. The resistance needs to focus on ourselves, on our survival. Don't waste any time on those who don't want to listen. I know this sounds harsh, but it's just a waste of time and energy. You know, most of the people who don't want to listen, they probably can't even be blamed for this. That's why, if you have a chance, watch our first interview with Peter Breggin and Naomi Wolf on Sushrit Bhakti's new theories, because this is what he explained. He said, mRNA vaccine technique is extremely dangerous because with the help of mRNA, all these lipid nanoparticles can break through the blood-brain barrier and do a lot of damage in the brain. They don't just kill people, but it also changes people's personality. I used to think I was imagining things, but people do look different. Not all of them, but some of them look different, and they act different. And Sushrit Bhakti says, yes, you're not mistaken, because it destroys the small capillaries, and it starts in the frontal lobe. This is where all your emotions are located. He could probably explain this much better than I can, but Peter Breggin compared this with the effects of lobotomy, and I find this really scary, really scary. That's why I think don't waste your time on trying to talk to these people, unless, of course, they ask for help. That's when we're going to have to be there and help them. But it's no use trying to convince them that they're doing the wrong thing. This time, no one will come to our aid. We will be the cavalry ourselves. We must stop this killing and this destruction of our economy. We will be there if people ask us for help, but we will not waste our time and energy on persuading anyone. Rather, let us connect with each other and set up those small regional, custom-made, and self-sufficient communities. Look at the facts and trust your instincts. Trust your instincts. It's really important. And remember, we can sing and dance, laugh and kiss. They cannot. They cannot. You know, at best, they can go through the motions and try to make us believe that they can do it. But they can't. I know it. I've seen it for 2 years firsthand. A good friend of mine, this is the final words, a good friend of mine, a doctor, told us the story of an elderly woman who, he's a doctor on the island of Rügen, which is up in the northern part of Germany. And one night, he was going to withdraw some money from one of the ATMs, one of the automatic teller machines, and he walked into the lobby of a bank, and he was the only one there, except for an elderly woman. And she was there wearing a mask. He wasn't. And she said, you can't come in. You have to wear a mask. And he said, no, and you don't either. Yes, I do. My husband is sick, and if I get infected and he gets infected. And he said, no, you don't. And he walked up to her, took off her mask and hugged her. And she started to cry because no one had hugged her in 2 years. So that is what this is all about. It's us humans against these monsters, but we will prevail. I promise you that. Thank you.